So it came out today that apparently the CIA is training and arming rebels in Syria. Now, this is strangely similar to what happened in the late 70s under Carter and the early 80s under Reagan with Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, the Mujahideen, the Taliban sort of Sunni fighters. Of course, Osama bin Laden, who everyone remembers, the great Satan, the great enemy of the West, 9/11 mastermind, terrible person. If we review history and use our thinking caps for a little while, we'll remember that this is almost exactly what the United States did during that period of time with them. The Mujahideen, of course, were armed and trained and given advice and intelligence by the CIA. The CIA went in and said, well, the Soviets are invading the Middle East. They were trying to get Afghanistan. They were trying to push their way south, probably to the Indian Ocean. So the CIA... Here, just a second. Yes, kitty, you can go out. Have fun. The CIA went in and gave these rebels, these freedom fighters at the time who later became terrorists, all sorts of arms and money and munitions and training, and magically later, despite the fact that we had helped them, they turned their backs on us and started fighting us. Now, wouldn't you think that the same thing is going to happen in Syria? I find it strange that we're not backing Assad in many ways, Bashar al-Assad. Yes, he's marginally a dictator, although he was technically elected. And the elections are probably less corrupt than the ones from Iraq. Of course, Saddam Hussein was another marginally secular leader who actually attacked quite brutally the Al-Qaeda and other associated Islamo-fascist groups. He didn't want them in his country. He wanted secular rule. He felt that their religion would be a challenge to this. And of course, we've unseated him. Then first we went into Afghanistan in the 70s and 80s. We armed the rebels there. They fought off the Soviets. Then we had to go back in to get rid of the same people we had armed, and that turned into a fiasco. Then we did the same thing in Iraq. Of course, Saddam Hussein was originally backed by the United States as well to fight off the Iranians. And it's rather strange. The United States, I'm assuming it has something to do with the fact that we get so much oil from the Sunnis in Saudi Arabia, and of course Saudi Arabia is the most atrocious country on earth for things like gay rights, women's rights, the rights of atheists, human rights in general. They've got a high censorship abilities. They censor everything going in and out of the country. You can get killed for dissing the royal family there. You can get killed there for desecrating a Quran or anything like that. Syria, if you look at pictures and video from Syria, is actually a marginally Western, relatively straightforwardly democratic country compared to places like Saudi Arabia or post-Taliban Afghanistan. When we went into Afghanistan the first time, Afghanistan was a shining example of a country that had actually somewhat modernized. They had a fairly good infrastructure. They were poor, yes, but their cities were relatively advanced. They were a seat of academic potential. And when the Soviets attempted to move into Afghanistan to get a hold of their mineral wealth and have an outlet to go further south to the Indian Ocean, we went in, we stopped that, but we crushed Afghanistan in the process. And we suffered for it for years afterwards. You'd think that after a while we would learn from our mistakes, but the same thing that we did in Afghanistan and Iraq, we are now doing in Syria. The CIA is arming and training rebels, some of which are Al-Qaeda agents, most of which are Islamo-fascists. They're backed and partnered with Al-Qaeda. These individuals want Sharia law, they want a theocracy, they want to turn Syria into another Afghanistan. So why are we arming these people? Why is there no public outcry? Why are people not saying we should be supporting Assad instead? For instance, a few days ago everyone was up in arms. They thought Assad had used chemical weapons. It turns out the rebels were the ones that created a chlorine bomb. So why would we be supporting these groups? They're obviously murderous and they're crazy and they're using chemical weapons, low grade, yes, but chemical weapons against Syrian troops. Assad has done essentially nothing wrong. There is no genocide in Syria. He's simply attacking these rebels. When the rebels bombed that outpost, that road stop with the chlorine bomb, the Syrian troops were taking care of the civilian injured. Assad is not really an enemy of the West at all. He doesn't have the capability to attack any Western nations. He's been continuously antagonized by the Israelis. They've attacked installations there despite no particular evidence that they were being used for anything wrong. Assad has, he's got a British wife. He's not some hardcore Sharia law-loving Islamo-fascist. He's an Alawite. Now, what people don't understand, and here's something that people here in the United States especially need to understand, the media portrays Islam as one homogeneous group in the West. And that's simply not the case. There are dozens of different subgroupings within Islam. The jihadists, the ones that blow themselves up in schools and use human shields, are primarily Sunni Muslims. They're Salafi, they're extremely fanatic, they're the most evangelical sect. They honestly do believe that blowing themselves up for Allah will win them brownie points in the afterlife. You don't see this among the Alawites, which Assad, of course, he and most of the members of the ruling party there are Alawites. The Alawites are a Sufi sect. And this Shiite-related mystic sect adopts elements of paganism and even Christianity into its form. It's considered a heretical movement by the Sunni Muslims. Now, I'm assuming that the Saudi Arabians have something to do with this. Of course, they're the major oil exporter of the region. The Israelis don't like the Syrians. Why, we're not exactly sure, because the Syrians haven't been overtly provocative towards the Israelis in the past. In fact, very much the opposite. But the Alawites should be our friends, essentially, over there. I've never understood why we partnered with the most fanatic Muslims who turn around and attack us when we do arm and help them, rather than the Shiites, for instance, the Iranians and the Alawites in Syria. They're not evangelicals. You can go to Syria today, you won't see women wearing full-length black veils, you won't see people being stoned in the streets for not being Muslim, you won't see people doing that. There are other groups within Syria that are perfectly well tolerated. Where you will see these things is Saudi Arabia or Afghanistan, places that we've either messed up, where we've gone in and attacked the moderates and the liberals for some reason, driven them out and left fanatics in charge, or countries that were run by theocratic tyrants like the Saudi royal family to begin with. It makes no sense whatsoever. The CIA is now doing the same thing in Syria that it did in Afghanistan, which ruined it in the first place. If you displace Assad and you displace the Alawites, there's only one other group in that country that can take power. And these rebel factions, by the way, will be more than happy to war with one another after Assad is gone, tearing the country apart in the process. The country may fall apart into different groups, all of which then will be U.S. armed and much more dangerous. Or it will stay essentially as a theocratic Sharia state. Now, Syria has a marginal economy. It's not a first world country by any means, but it's not as poor as Afghanistan. It's not falling apart, except that the rebels are destroying all of the infrastructure now. The Syrian army is essentially defending itself against groups of thugs that wander the streets and are beating on innocent civilians. It makes I don't understand the fascination in the West, and every time I go onto a news comment section and see people talking about how bad Assad is, I point out to them, do you not understand that these rebels are primarily Al-Qaeda agents? Have you forgotten 9/11 already? Do you have that much of a death wish that you want to repeat the exact same failed policies in the 70s and 80s that caused Al-Qaeda to rise to power? It's almost like the Western government that the governments of the Western world, the EU, the United States, it's almost like they want Islamic terrorism to continuously rise. It makes absolutely no sense. We're going to waste our money and our time training these people when you know completely that they're going to turn around after the fact and attack us. What happens when Assad is gone? What happens to the chemical weapons? Are these rebels really going to tolerate us going in and confiscating them? Are the Israelis going to take part in that? Are they going to go into the country and help out? Or is the U.S. going to have to land 50,000 troops in Damascus? There's no clear answer. This is an area with a volatile chemical weapons network. It might have biological agents, and unlike Iraq, they actually do have significant chemical stockpiles. And we're arming these rebels. These individuals don't have any leadership experience. They don't know how to run a country except by Sharia code. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. Not to say that Assad is a great person, not to say that he's not guilty of certain crimes as well, but what world leader isn't? He's no worse than George W. Bush. He's no worse than Obama. He's no worse than Putin. He's no worse than any of the other leaders in the Western world, all of who violate their own people's civil rights. Of course, civil rights is subjective now because it's eroding so quickly. And we're going in and arming terrorists. Today's freedom fighters, so-called, will be tomorrow's terrorists. If Assad is toppled, and we arm the rebels, and the rebels take over and make it a strict Islamic state, which is almost certain to happen if Assad loses. And for that reason, I hope that the Russians have the balls to go in and help Assad. I hope that they land troops there and say, everyone else out, no CIA in the country, we're taking control, Syria is ours. I hope the Russians take Syria, because that will prevent the proliferation of terrorism in that region. This is a country that's right across, this isn't Afghanistan, which is a great further distance away from Europe. This is right on Europe's doorstep. It's right next to Israel. It's right next to Turkey, which in turn is basically the stopgap between the European world and the Islamic world. This is on the shores of the Mediterranean. This isn't in South Central Asia. This is a country of great strategic importance. If we topple Assad, for all of his faults, he's more capable of keeping that nation stable than these rebels are. These rebels will take over and they'll either carve the country up or they'll slaughter each other and civilians in the streets, and everyone will wonder, well, what happened? We thought they were on our side. We got rid of Assad and we gave them weapons. Why is there no stability? Well, we tried that in Afghanistan. We tried it in Iraq. It didn't work. This sort of police state United States, this sort of world police thing, doesn't work. We've tried it before. It's continuously failed. We haven't had a single success in the entire history of the United States trying to do this sort of thing. It makes no sense whatsoever. So for all of his faults, I support Assad over the rebels. The rebels are guilty of crimes just as Assad is. The rebels, of course, if they take over, will probably commit genocide against the Alawites, which I think, for some unknown reason, the West wants. They want the Shiites to die off, even though they're the more logical Muslims. It just makes no sense. It really, it's a complete what-the-fuck scenario. It makes no sense whatsoever. So I hope Assad wipes the floor with the rebels and or the Russians get involved, or the Iranians. It wouldn't matter to me if the Iranians got into I would actually support Russia, Iran, and Syria over our own government in such a situation, just because the rebels they're Al-Qaeda affiliates. They're terrorists. Why is our own government arming members of a declared terrorist group whose one major stated purpose is Islam for the whole world, and let's kill everyone else off. Let's kill off the Christians and the Jews and the atheists and the gays and the disobedient children and so forth. It makes no sense whatsoever. If I were to send $100 to an Al-Qaeda agent, I'd be put in Gitmo. So why can the CIA go over there and arm the same exact people and give them weapons and supplies? Ask yourself if this makes any logical sense. It doesn't. Peace out.